Hello everyone and welcome back to Kayla's Kitchen. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a tea talk / recipe video, but we'll just sort of see what this is. But the topic for today is cupcakes. So if you know anything about me, you know that I love cupcakes. Baking cupcakes and watching shows like Cupcake Wars is really what started my love of baking. So they're very sort of sentimental for me. So I love cupcakes. I think that they're really fun to bake, they're so cute, and they're just this perfect little single serve dessert. I don't know, I really like them. So because of my love of cupcakes, I thought that it would be sort of interesting to talk about the history of the cupcake. So that's what the sort of tea talk portion of this video is going to be about. And because this is a tea talk, I of course have to have my cup of tea. So I am drinking David's Tea's butterscotch chai, and this is my mushroom mug. It has a little lid that looks like a mushroom, but I don't know, I just call it my mushroom mug. I love it. If you want to know my thoughts on this tea, you can check the review out, which is gonna be up here. And one more thing that was absolutely necessary to mention is that I have these little cupcake earrings in today. So, you know, theming. So what are we gonna talk about? I have some notes here, and all of my sources that I gathered this information from will be linked down below so that you can check out and read more about cupcakes and everything that I read. So let's talk about cupcakes. So the first thing that we have to talk about is that cupcake has multiple meanings. So there's the cupcake, which is what we think of today, and there's also a cupcake. There's a difference. Cupcake, cupcake. So a cupcake is also known as a 1, 2, 3, 4 cake, and that is a recipe cake. So the recipe is in the name. So it's called a 1, 2, 3, 4 or a cupcake because the recipe calls for 1 cup of butter, 2 cups of sugar, 3 cups of flour, and 4 eggs. So it's called a cupcake because it's all measured in cups, or a 1, 2, 3, 4 cake because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, these 1, 2, 3, 4 cakes are much older than cupcakes as we know them today, and that was the original what would have been thought of when you said cupcake. It was not until 1796 that a woman named Amelia Simmons called for little cakes to be baked in small cups. Now, this was in her American Cookery recipe book, and like I said, this is late 1700s, and all signs point to the fact that what we think of being a muffin tin or a cupcake tin hadn't really been invented yet. So most likely this meant that these were baked in small ramekins or small ceramic bowls. Now, while this was what we consider to be the first cupcake because it was baked in small cups, it actually wasn't called a cupcake, it was just a cake recipe. The first known use of the term cupcake was in 1828. A lady named Eliza Leslie wrote in her cookbook 75 receipts for cakes, pastry, and sweet meats that she has 2 cupcakes recipes in there. And what's interesting about Eliza Leslie is that her measurements that she used were always consistent throughout her cookbooks, and her measurements were also used in developing a more universal definition of cup or whatever. Another interesting measurement that she uses a lot in her cookbook is a teacup. It's interesting because nowadays we don't really know exactly what that meant, just because it did vary because it wasn't completely standardized, but her measurements most likely was somewhere between 1/2 cup and 3/4 of a cup, as is what a teacup meant. I just really liked that she uses teacups to measure. I like that. So, teacups. Anyway, we're gonna come back to Eliza Leslie and teacup measurements later. Let's just continue on with this history. So remember, the first official use of cupcake was in 1828, but it wasn't until 1919 that cupcakes started being made commercially, and that was by the brand Hostess. It was also around this time of the 1920s that cupcakes started being frosted. Originally, when cupcakes were first made, there was no frosting. They didn't know what that was, so that's kind of spooky. And now we're kind of jumping ahead a lot, but in 2005, the first cupcake-only bakery was opened up, and that is, of course, Sprinkles Cupcakes. So that is my very short lots of time gaps, history of the cupcake. But now let's take a look at Eliza Leslie's first 2 cupcake recipes. So she had 2. The first one we're going to look at is the New York cupcake, and I have some pictures that I have of these recipes. So let's take a look at what she calls for. So this is called a New York cupcake, and it calls for 4 eggs, 4 cups of sifted flour, 3 cups of powdered white sugar, 1 cup of butter, 1 cup of rich milk, 1 glass of white wine, a grated nutmeg, a teaspoonful of cinnamon, and a teaspoonful of pearl ash. So there's a couple of kind of interesting ingredients in here, and the one thing that you might notice is that there's no leavening, or at least there isn't a leavening agent that we recognize today. There actually is a leavening agent in here, and that is the pearl ash. So pearl ash was a kind of salt-like chemical that was added into recipes, and it was used as a leavener. It was the precursor to baking soda. And pearl ash was similar to baking soda. It reacts with acid to create air bubbles both during the mixing process and when it's baked. So pearl ash itself does act as a leavener, but the one downside of pearl ash, and the reason that it was later replaced with baking soda, is that it had a really bad and strong taste. I'm not positive about this, but what I think is that in Miss Leslie's recipes, she adds in a lot of very flavorful things. In this one, there's wine, there's a lot of spices, and I think that she's adding those in to counteract the flavor of the pearl ash. In the next recipe that we're going to look at, there is a lot of spice in it, and I think that the reason that there's so much is because she's trying to mask the bad flavor that pearl ash would bring. The other thing that's very interesting is that there is a lot of sugar in this recipe. To an astounding 4 cups of flour, there is 3 cups of sugar. And the interesting thing is that it says powdered white sugar as well. To me, powdered sugar means confectioner's sugar. I'm not sure if that is the same thing. Reading these recipes is so interesting because you have to go back and look at, well, what did they have in 1828? What kinds of things were around? Because baking soda was actually about to be discovered, but it hadn't been yet. So that's why all of her recipes for cakes and anything like that has pearl ash instead of baking soda. Now, the next recipe that we have here is the ginger cupcake. So this recipe calls for 5 eggs, 2 large teacupfuls of molasses. There are those teacupfuls again. You have another 2 teacupfuls of brown sugar, 2 teacupfuls of fresh butter, 1 cup of rich milk, 5 cups of flour, half a cup of powdered allspice and cloves, and half a cup of ginger. And again, we have a half teaspoonful of pearl ash and melted vinegar. So once again, we have these astounding half cup measurements of spices. That is so much. That's insane. I can't even, why would they do that? Why so much? And what I'm inferring from that large amount of spice, and once again, there's a large concentration of sugar in here as well, I think that was there to try and mask the flavor of pearl ash. Now, the reason this video is also going to be a sort of recipe video is because I am going to make ginger cupcakes. I'm going to make Miss Leslie's ginger cupcake recipe. Now, I am going to majorly cut this recipe down. Now, I did manage to get my hands on a copy of Miss Leslie's recipe book for 75 receipts for pastry, cakes, and sweetmeats. The interesting thing about this is that in this version, and it is her cookbook, but you can tell this is just a printed paperback version. It actually doesn't have the pearl ash in any of these recipes. So whoever did type this up edited that out because we don't use it anymore. One thing that's really interesting is that when you produced a cookbook, this was mainly for cooks or people who were cooking for their family. And so the directions are rather scarce, because they assumed that these people who were using this cookbook knew what they were doing. So in the directions, there's actually very little within the recipe about what to do. However, at the beginning, Miss Leslie actually includes some general directions at the beginning of her section on cakes, and she does that for all of the sections in her cookbook. Now, I did want to read you just a little bit from the preface of her cookbook because I thought this was really funny. Another thing that Eliza Leslie is known for is actually being a fairly funny and well-spoken writer. So her introductions to her cookbooks tended to be at least fun to read. So I'm just gonna read a little paragraph. So she says, "There's frequently much difficulty in following directions in English and French cookery books, not only from their want of explicitness, but from the difference in the fuel, fireplaces, and cooking utensils generally used in Europe and America. And many of the European receipts are so complicated and laborious that our female cooks are afraid to undertake the arduous task of making anything from them." And I just thought that that was really funny. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, I just thought it was funny. I love the arduous task of making anything from them. You can tell she's so prejudiced against and a more English and French style of cooking just by her writing, and I just think it's funny. Anyway, let's just make some cakes. So the first thing that this recipe calls for is to cut the butter into cubes and heat it with milk and the molasses until it is all combined. Now I'm going to try and do all of this cooking as if I am in 1828 standing beside Miss Leslie herself. So we're gonna do this on the stove. Normally I would do this in the microwave, but they didn't have microwaves in 1828, so time to put this on the stove. The next thing that we're going to do is add the sugar and set this aside to cool. Now we are going to begin the, I'm gonna use a word from Miss Leslie, arduous process of beating the eggs, and without our typical electric or stand mixers, this is going to be a long and laborious process. So I'm going to beat this egg until it is as light and fluffy and glossy as I can get it. Whew. And now that that is done, I'm going to add the beaten egg and the flour into the previous mixture, alternating them. Now, once those are combined in, we're going to gently fold in the ginger and the other spices until it is all combined and thoroughly dispersed. All signs point to there being muffin tins at this point in history, so I am going to use muffin tins. However, I can't use our little paper cupcake wrappers because those probably weren't around yet. So we are going to have to butter and flour our entire cupcake tin. And once again, ovens were not as we know them today, so her directions simply say to bake the cakes in a moderate oven. So I'm going to put these in a 350-degree oven, and I'm going to start with about 12 minutes on them, and we'll go from there. Okay, everyone, here they are. No one asked me to do this, and I'm starting to regret it. So, here's the thing with this recipe. 1, there's no leavener, so as you can see, they didn't rise at all. They are flat as pancakes. 2, there's actually a surprisingly little amount of sugar in this compared to the other recipe. Remember, the New York Cupcake recipe had 4 cups of flour and 3 cups of sugar, so that ratio is very high. However, this one was not. This one had about half the amount of sugar as flour. Now, granted, it did have molasses in it, which is sweet. However, molasses also brings like a warming, tangy, spicy feeling, and the amount of spice in these it just didn't help. It didn't help. It didn't help at all. So, for one, it makes your house smell amazing because it makes your house smell like spices, but for anything other than that, they bake up to this, let me show you. You can see how just stodgy that is, to borrow a Great British Baking Show term. It is just, it's just dense. I'm squishing it. So it is dense, and it's not sweet, and it is spicy to the point of being savory. It's weird. So I've already taken a bite, and I can still feel it in my mouth. So I'm gonna take another bite and ruin the rest of my day even more. You first bite into it and you're like, oh, that's not too bad. It slowly comes onto you with just this overpowering, like, the allspice makes it taste almost peppery, and there's just not enough sugar to make this a sweet ginger cake. It's basically savory. It's weird. So, do I recommend making this? No, not at all. Not at all. Unless you want to serve this at like a tea party where you hate your guests or something like that. I don't know. But I think it's interesting to wonder and discuss why this recipe is so much different from like what we experience today as cupcakes. And the main thing in here is, of course, the leavener. Now, might these cupcakes have been better had I added in some baking soda and salt? Absolutely. However, the amount of spice in them is just bonkers. Like, bonkers. I tell you, it is wacky. So, a few things. If I were to be making a ginger cake recipe, what I would do, first of all, there'd be leavener in it. Second of all, the way that she combines her ingredients is a little bit strange. So she melts together the butter and the molasses into the milk, and in doing that, you're not creaming the butter with the sugar. And the reason that that's perhaps not ideal is that when you cream the butter and sugar, you're also adding in air. And what that is going to do is create, once again, a lighter, fluffier, it's gonna create good texture for your cake. So by melting the butter, molasses, and milk together, you're once again doing something that doesn't help the texture. So if I were to make a ginger cake recipe, 1, we would cream our butter and sugar. 2, we would use a leavener. In most of my recipes, when I make them, I like to use primarily baking powder, and then to really create a nice light and fluffy texture, I also add in some baking soda, and using both of those things together really helps to create a nice light and fluffy cake, like what you expect from a cake mix. 3, whipping the egg is like good because there's no leavener, but that's not as necessary when you cream your butter and sugar together, so you don't have to do that anymore, and that definitely saves your arms. And 4, in terms of how much spices I would put in, if I were to use, it's about half a cup of flour. So for about a half a cup of flour, I would probably use a 1/4 teaspoon of each of these spices. Perhaps because it is supposed to be a ginger cake, a half a teaspoon of ginger, but you know, a whole tablespoon, that's not where it's at. That's not what anyone wants. No one wants to taste that. So am I feeling sad that the original cupcake recipe actually tastes like garbage? I mean, yeah, I kind of expected it to, but like, still disappointing. Anyway, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite flavor of cupcake is. For me, I like to have chocolate cake with caramel buttercream. That's my favorite cupcake. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and subscribe down below, and hit the notification bell so that you can know when I post a new video. That is all for now, so as always, happy sipping!